هادئة جدا.
Good afternoon. You're watching the English newscast on Future Television. I'm Yumna Naufal, and these are today's top stories. An Egypt air flight traveling from Paris to Cairo disappears. 60 people on board. Greek officials say it swerved before plunging in the Mediterranean. The Lebanese Parliament joint committees meet for a third time this month to discuss a new electoral law. And Syrian government forces and allies, including Lebanese Hezbollah fighters, seize an extensive area southeast of Damascus from rebels. An Egypt air flight 804 traveling from Paris to Cairo has disappeared from radar with 56 passengers, 10 crew members on board. Anonymous Egyptian aviation officials are saying that the plane crashed in the Mediterranean Sea and that the search is now underway for the debris. But Egypt's Civil Aviation Ministry later stated that it was too early to confirm if the plane has crashed. The plane took off from Paris' Charles de Gaulle airport shortly after 11 p.m. local time. Egypt's Prime Minister Sharif Ismail is saying that the search is underway to find the missing Egypt airplane and that it was too early to rule out any explanation for the incident, including terrorism. This is not the first air safety crisis Egypt has faced recently, as in March, a domestic Egypt Air flight was hijacked and forced to land in Cyprus. Lebanon's Prime Minister Tamam Salam is offering his condolences to the Egyptian president and premier over the casualties of the Egypt Air flight, should it be ruled that it has crashed. It is believed to have crashed overnight. A Greek airport source is saying that the Airbus A320 crashed off the Greek island of Karpathos in Egyptian airspace. Egypt's aviation ministry said 30 Egyptian, 15 French, 1 British and a Belgian were among the 66 on board, making a total of 56 passengers as well as 10 crew members. The Parliament's joint committees are meeting for a third time this month to discuss a new electoral law, a day after Speaker Nabih Berri offered an initiative to hold parliamentary polls before the election of a president. Last month, Berri said he would not call for parliamentary sessions before joint parliamentary committees completed their discussions over the new electoral law to replace the 1960 voting system, which calls for electoral districts to be based on the quotas or constituents. During the first session, rival MPs agreed to limit discussions of a new law to 3 categories: a hybrid law, a law based on proportional representation, and a law based on Lebanon as a single constituency. The 1960s electoral law, last used in the 2009 legislative polls, is based on a winner-take-all system with constituencies based on the country's administrative districts. The session was adjourned to May 26th. Lebanese leader Samir Jaja is reaffirming ties with the Free Patriotic Movement, saying their relationship will never be shaken. The Lebanese Forces chief is noting that even though there was an alliance with the FPM in many municipalities, the media is only focusing on the rivalry between the two groups during the local elections. In January, Jaja had nominated FPM founder Michel Aoun for the presidency, ending over 2 decades of bitter ties between the wartime arch-rivals and sending shockwaves through Lebanon's political spectrum. The two also reached an understanding on 10 national issues, which include Lebanon's foreign policy and the role played by the state's security and military agencies. The endorsement has further destabilized relations between Jaja and his March 14 allies, as well as between Aoun and his March 8 allies. Economy Minister Alain Hakim is calling on Lebanon's Interior Minister to form a team to work on the country's solid waste management as soon as possible to prevent a waste crisis from reoccurring. Hakim has asked Nuhad Mashnout to clarify the reasons behind the delay in forming a technical team to start working on a solid waste management plan. His appeal comes only hours after the notorious Naameh landfill permanently closed. Its midnight closure comes at the end of a government deadline which permitted the landfill to receive trash for a 2-month period. As part of the March plan to solve the 8-month trash crisis in Lebanon, landfills in Costa Brava and Burj Hamoud were established to replace the waste south of Lebanon. However, with both landfills not yet fully operational, fears have grown that another waste crisis will be repeated. The government's failure to reach a solution prompted civil society groups to hold protests, which at times have taken violent turns. Syrian government forces and allies, including Lebanese Hezbollah fighters, seized an extensive area southeast of Damascus from rebels and fought other insurgents near a highway leading southwest. The advance is part of a wider escalation in fighting that has accompanied failed diplomatic efforts to end the 5-year conflict. Syria's war has killed 250,000 people, created the worst refugee crisis since World War II, allowed for the rise of Islamic states, and drawn in many regional and global powers. The fighting began when government forces and Hezbollah fighters captured the town of Deir es-Safir and then seized a number of other areas nearby, closing off a pocket of rebel control in eastern Ghouta. Hundreds of families fled Deir es-Safir because of the intensity of the clashes between the government side and the rebels. Iraq is announcing that its forces have recaptured the western town of Rudba, which had been held by the Daesh group since 2014. Special forces, soldiers, and police took part in the operation. Iraqi forces launched the drive to retake Rudba, located in western Anbar province along the main road to Jordan 3 days earlier. Daesh overran large areas north and west of Baghdad in June 2014 and later made further advances in Anbar, seizing its capital, Ramadi, in 2015. Iraqi forces have since regained significant ground from Daesh, securing the Ramadi area earlier this year and retaking the town of Hit last month. But parts of Anbar, including its second city of Fallujah, are still under its control, as is most of Nineveh province. Coming up next, France Prime Minister calls for harsh punishment for those attacking police officers as protests continue in France. Stay with us, we'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching the 16:20 o'clock news on Future Television. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel is looking to form the most right-wing government in Israeli history, with Avigdor Lieberman, a hardliner loathed by Palestinians, expected to join as defense minister. Netanyahu's allies are set for fresh negotiations with representatives of Lieberman's far-right Yisrael Beitenu party to try to entice it to join the governing coalition. The return to government of Lieberman could raise international concern about his government's policies. As defense minister, Lieberman would oversee military operations in the Palestinian territories and have a major say in policy towards the settlements. The Palestinians are waiting for confirmation of Lieberman's appointment before making a formal response, but one official is saying that it would be a disaster for Palestinians living under Israeli occupation. Libya's unity government is urging the international community to accelerate the arming of its forces after 32 of its fighters were killed in clashes with militants in a car bombing. The United States, Italy, and Libya's allies and neighbors agreed in Vienna on Monday to exempt the government of National Accord from a UN arms embargo to help it confront the threat from Daesh. The government of National Accord urged the international community to take responsibility and to accelerate the implementation of its promises, including the exemption to the embargo on weapons sales. Libya was left with two rival administrations after a militia alliance took over Tripoli in mid-2014, setting up its own authority and forcing the elected parliament to flee to Tobruk in the country's far east. France's Prime Minister Manuel Valls is calling for harsh punishment for those attacking police officers a day after protesters torched a police vehicle in central Paris. A rare rally by police to protest against anti-cop hatred descended into violence a day earlier, with a small group hammering a police vehicle with iron bars before hurling an explosive device inside. Police officers were reported to be inside the vehicle but managed to flee. The incident comes as some 300 people defied a ban to march through the streets chanting "Cops, Killers," as police forced the demonstrators back with volleys of tear gas. Over the past 2 months, some 350 members of the security forces have been injured during protests against the proposed labor reforms, which were forced through the lower house of parliament last week without a vote. The first of 219 Chibok schoolgirls is found after more than 2 years held captive by Boko Haram. Amina Ali is set to meet Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari, the governor of Borno State. She was discovered by civilian vigilantes and soldiers 2 days ago and was brought to the state capital, Maiduguri, by Air Force helicopter with her 4-month-old baby and a suspected Boko Haram terrorist man claiming to be her husband. Boko Haram seized 276 students from the government girls' secondary school in the remote Borno town of Chibok on the evening of April 14, 2014. 57 managed to escape in the immediate aftermath, but Amina, who was 17 when she was kidnapped, and 218 others have been held since. The teenager was reportedly telling community leaders that most of the abducted girls were being held in the Sambiza forest area of Borno, but that 6 had died. An Azerbaijan freight plane has crashed in Afghanistan, killing 7 crew members while 2 survived. The Antonov 12 plane that belonged to Azerbaijan's Silkway cargo airline crashed on takeoff from Dwyer Air Base in the southern Helmand province. The Azerbaijani Civil Aviation Authority said it had launched an investigation into the incident. Previously, a cargo plane operated by Silkway and carrying supplies for the NATO mission crashed into mountains in Afghanistan in 2011 as it tried to land at Bagram, killing all 9 crew members. Democratic presidential candidate Bernie Sanders did not skip a beat after his win during the Oregon primary the night before and continues his campaign in the battleground state of California, where he will face off against rival for the nomination Hillary Clinton on June 7th. Speaking at the Vallejo Waterfront Park in Vallejo, California, Sanders celebrated the Oregon victory together with his supporters. While the Democratic primary now hits a 2-week lull before the final set of major nominating contests scheduled for June 7, Sanders says the challenge now was securing as many delegates as possible.
A lot has happened over the last year, and as of last night, we have won our 20th state. There are 6 states remaining, and I hope by the end of this nominating process, we will win at least half or more of the states in our country. As of today, we have won over 9 million votes and almost 46% of all of the pledged delegates, the real delegates that were voted on by the people. Now, I don't deny for a moment that we have an uphill fight in order to win a majority of the pledged delegates. But we are going to fight in California and the remaining 5 other states to get every vote and every delegate we can. And let me also mention something to you, and that is that in every state poll and in every national poll that I have seen in the last 2 months, we defeat Donald Trump. And we always defeat him by larger margins than does Secretary Clinton. So our message to the Democratic Convention is that if they want to defeat Trump, and together we must defeat Trump, together we are the campaign to do it.
This marks the end of our bulletin for today. Now for a reminder of our headlines. An Egypt Air flight traveling from Paris to Cairo disappears with 60 people on board. Greek officials say it swerved before plunging into the Mediterranean. The Lebanese Parliament Joint Committees meet for a 3rd time this month alone to discuss a new electoral law. And Syrian government forces and allies, including Hezbollah, seize an extensive area southeast of Damascus from rebels. Those are your Thursday headlines live on Future Television. I'm Yumna Nofal signing off. Have a good night.
هادئة جدا.